When Margaret Thornfield and the sheriff's men forced their way inside the farmhouse that night, the air felt thick enough to chew. The smell of rot clung to their clothes like oil. The crib in the farthest room held something that made every man present go silent. It wasn't just fear. It was awe, the terrible kind that makes knees go weak. The infant inside should not have been alive. Its head was elongated, skull ridges spiraling inward like the rings of a tree. Its limbs branched strangely, each arm splitting into too many joints. But the eyes were what froze them. 7 of them, glistening wetly, each moving independently. They followed the flashlights, tracking movement before it happened, as though anticipating where the beam would fall. The 2 men standing by the crib were deathly thin, their skin stretched like paper over bone. They didn't speak, didn't move. They only stared at the intruders, faces blank, eyes hollow. When the infant shifted, the room seemed to tighten. Its fingers moved like roots, testing soil, curling and uncurling. It turned toward the men and reached, its joints bending in impossible directions. None of them breathed. Time itself felt suspended, as if the house was holding them captive, waiting for some unseen verdict to be delivered. The sheriff was the first to move. He backed away slowly, motioning to his deputy to do the same. No one fired a weapon. No one dared. Whatever this was, bullets felt useless, like throwing stones at a storm. They left the room and called for reinforcements. Within hours, the farmhouse was swarming with law enforcement, medics, and men from state agencies who arrived faster than anyone could explain. Doctors who examined the infant refused to speak to reporters later. Privately, they admitted they had never seen such genetic complexity. Chromosomes looping back on themselves, forming patterns that should have been fatal. The infant reacted to their presence with eerie precision. It turned toward sounds before they were made, reached for objects before they were revealed, as if aware of events seconds before they occurred. When they brought the parents forward, Elijah Holloway and his brother, the infant's reaction was not joy. It reached toward them as though recognizing not 2 men, but pieces of itself. Geneticists from the University of Kentucky were summoned. They worked through the night, taking samples, sequencing DNA, discovering a code so recursive that some compared it to a biological Mobius strip. It should not have been compatible with life, but here it was, breathing softly, chest rising and falling with unnerving calm. The infant watched them all as though it understood exactly what they were doing. Witnesses said the atmosphere in the room grew heavier as hours passed. Men complained of headaches, dizziness, and dreams when they dozed, dreams filled with twisting trees and faces half-formed. By dawn, federal agents had arrived. They took control of the farmhouse, sealed off the road, and ordered everyone who had entered to sign non-disclosure agreements under threat of prosecution. The infant, the 2 surviving Holloways, and every scrap of evidence were loaded into unmarked vans. By mid-morning, Holloway Ridge was empty except for the shell of the ruined house. Within days, the house was bulldozed, the earth scraped clean, and a perimeter fence erected. Official records listed the property as environmentally contaminated, warning locals to stay away. Those who had seen the infant struggled to sleep for weeks. Some quit their jobs, unable to shake the feeling they were still being watched by those 7 glistening eyes, even miles away. Hospital staff who had briefly cared for the child reported hallucinations. One orderly swore he saw the infant's face reflected in the stainless steel cabinets, smiling faintly though the crib was empty. Security footage from the morgue was destroyed after several guards resigned, claiming what they saw on the tape was not possible. One man said the infant moved though no one was near it. The surviving Holloways were transferred to a federal facility. Former employees later described a place that was half hospital, half prison, filled with scientists taking endless measurements, photographing every twitch and blink. The men did not resist. They seemed almost relieved, as if their purpose had been fulfilled with the birth of the infant, and all that was left was to wait for whatever came next. One geneticist, Dr. Morrison, later broke his silence. He claimed the government was less interested in curing anything than in learning how far human DNA could be stretched before breaking entirely. The infant grew quickly, but unevenly. Its head developed faster than its body, and one arm appeared to age months ahead of the rest, as if time moved differently through its tissues. What disturbed Morrison most was that its consciousness seemed to grow beyond its body. Instruments recorded electrical activity outside the crib, as though its awareness was bleeding into the environment around it. Plants brought into its room wilted in strange spirals. Small animals developed temporary mutations, extra digits, altered fur patterns, simply from being near it. None of the researchers could explain how. When the child made sounds, recordings later revealed frequencies that normal human ears could barely perceive, pitches so low and high they caused equipment malfunctions and made men nauseous. Some began to suspect it was communicating, not just with them, but with the very space around it. Lights flickered in patterns matching the child's breathing. Machines powered off without being touched. One night, a guard swore he saw the infant standing in its crib, though it had not yet learned to walk. When others rushed in, it was lying down again, smiling faintly. By the early 1990s, the infant had become less a patient and more a specimen. The facility kept it under near-constant observation, every movement logged, every biological sample stored in sealed containers. Morrison's notes hint that the child began to influence those who worked near it. Men dreamed of strange forests, of family trees twisting like knots, of children with faces both familiar and alien. Some scientists requested reassignment, claiming they no longer felt entirely themselves, that their thoughts were not private, that something else was thinking with them. The requests were quietly granted. In 1994, the government declared the child dead, but Morrison insisted later that it had not died in any traditional sense. Its body stopped functioning, but its presence remained in the room. Sensors continued recording faint electrical activity for weeks after the body was removed. Plants still curled into spirals. Researchers reported hearing breathing where there was none, as if the room itself had learned to inhale. The surviving Holloway men vanished from records soon after. Some believed they were executed. Others suspected they were kept alive for further study, their genetic material too valuable to lose. Today, all that remains is a fence on Holloway Ridge and government files sealed beyond public reach. But locals still swear they hear crying on windless nights, drifting down from the ridge, and men who were there that night in 1987, those few still living, refuse to speak. They carry the memory silently, like a stone in the chest that will never stop weighing them down. Nearly 4 decades after that night on Holloway Ridge, the name Holloway has been scrubbed from official records. County maps show the land as restricted. Birth and death certificates have been quietly altered. But erasure does not mean forgetting. The story survives in whispers, in late-night conversations among men who live near the ridge, in rumors that refuse to die, no matter how carefully buried. Old-timers say the government fenced the property because it is poisoned, but they glance at the tree line when they say it, as though expecting something to emerge from the dark. Some claim the soil itself is different now. Crops planted too near the fence grow in twisted shapes, roots curling back toward the surface, as though something beneath the ground is pushing upward. Men who camp near the ridge report dreams so vivid they wake in sweat. They speak of standing in endless forests of crooked trees, hearing voices whispering in a language older than speech. Others dream of children with too many eyes, watching silently from the shadows, waiting for something. These dreams spread like contagion, afflicting neighbors who have never even set foot on the ridge. Hospital records in the surrounding counties tell their own quiet story. Since 1994, genetic anomalies have increased. Babies born with unusual eye spacing, extra digits, or hearing ranges far beyond normal human limits. Doctors dismiss them as coincidence, but the pattern is undeniable. Traits once confined to a single ridge now ripple outward, faint but steady, as though the Holloway bloodline is seeding itself beyond the grave. Some geneticists suggest the infant's consciousness never vanished, merely dispersed. If true, its influence could be drifting invisibly through families who have no idea they carry fragments of the ridge within them. Locals speak of strange interference near the property. Radios pick up static laced with faint crying. Phones lose signal. Hunters report seeing pale figures at the edge of the trees at dusk. Men who claim to have seen them describe bodies too thin, movements too smooth, faces that seem blurred as if the eye refuses to hold their shapes for more than a heartbeat. Those who have lived near the ridge long enough develop an instinct. They do not go outside after dark. They do not whistle in the woods. They leave offerings at the fence line. Small objects, deer bones, old coins, tobacco, left carefully as if paying tribute. By morning, the offerings are always gone, though no tracks lead to or from the fence. Some say the Holloways are still there, or something wearing their shapes. Others believe the ridge itself has taken on a kind of life, a living memory of the generations that fed it. The most unsettling accounts come from men who claim the ridge calls them. They describe hearing their names whispered in the wind, luring them toward the trees, promising answers no one should seek. Those who ignore the call sometimes become sick. Headaches, fevers, nosebleeds. Others vanish entirely, leaving behind gear, vehicles, lives abandoned as if they simply stepped off the map and kept walking. Researchers still study the genetic samples collected decades ago. In academic journals, hidden in footnotes, there are references to the Kentucky case, a cautionary example of hereditary collapse pushed to its limit. But some researchers privately admit they aren't sure it was collapse at all. They wonder if the Holloways were not failing but transforming, crossing into something beyond what modern science can name. If so, then what was found in that crib was not the end of a bloodline, but the first step into something new, something that will not be contained by fences or files. Federal agencies still monitor the ridge. Men in unmarked trucks patrol the perimeter every few months, checking sensors, repairing sections of fence. Whatever they fear, they clearly believe it is still active. Hunters sometimes report hearing a low hum at night, like machinery buried deep underground. Others claim to see lights glowing faintly among the trees, moving in slow patterns like fireflies too large. One deputy swore he saw a boy standing at the edge of the fence line. When he blinked, the boy was gone, but the ground where he stood was scorched black. These sightings are never logged officially. Reports are buried, witnesses discouraged from speaking, yet every few years, another story surfaces, another man swearing he saw something watching him from the ridge. Some wonder if the Holloway bloodline has truly ended at all. Perhaps it has simply left behind something that no longer needs bodies to continue, something that spreads like a thought. The idea terrifies even scientists. If consciousness can be passed like a contagion, then the Holloways may already be inside the minds of men who have never even heard the family name. Folklore around the ridge calls it the curse, but others whisper that it is a gift, the fulfillment of Ezekiel's promise, his bloodline purified until it became something greater than human. And maybe that is the real fear, that the Holloways succeeded, that they became exactly what they set out to be, a family untouched by the world, evolving on their own terms. The question that keeps researchers awake is not whether it could happen again, but whether it is already happening quietly, invisibly, in other isolated bloodlines, in places no one is watching. Because if the Holloways were not a genetic accident but a preview, then what waits on the other side of that transformation is not extinction, but a new branch of humanity. And somewhere, buried in a government archive, lie the records of what that new branch looked like, how it moved, how it stared back at the men who discovered it that summer night. Those files will never be declassified. The public will never see the photographs, the measurements, the recordings of sounds that made men leave the room shaking, unable to stop hearing them. But the ridge remembers. The trees lean inward as if listening. The wind carries that faint, keening cry, and the men who hear it know better than to follow where it leads. For some doors, once opened, never truly close. Some bloodlines never really end. The Holloways may be gone, but their legacy lives, not in names or graves, but in the very shape of men. And if you stand near Holloway Ridge on a moonless night, you may feel it. That weight pressing on your chest, that sense of being watched. Perhaps it is only memory, perhaps not. By the early 1900s, Millbrook was changing. Telegraph poles lined the road, trains cut through the hills, and yet Kine Valley seemed untouched. A shadowed place that swallowed progress and spat out whispers no one wanted repeated. The Blackwood farm stood like a fortress, half hidden behind pine and mist. Lanterns glowed at night, casting long shapes that looked almost alive, flickering on walls where dogs paced and figures stood unmoving, watching the darkened tree line. Men laying new rail near the valley swore they felt eyes on them. They claimed the forest was too quiet, the wind too still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. At night, strange howls rolled through the hills, starting as a single note before splitting into layered harmonies, a sound that raised the hair on men's arms and sent them reaching for their rifles. Some refused to work past sundown, saying they'd seen shapes pacing just beyond the lantern light, tall shapes that dropped to all fours, their movements too smooth to be anything human, too deliberate to be wolves. Bootleggers came during Prohibition, thinking the remote valley a safe haven for their trade. Most didn't last. Those who returned to town had the same hollow look, as if they had seen judgment itself. One man, a drifter named Caleb, came back with his coat shredded, his eyes wide. He said something had circled his tent all night, footsteps that weren't footsteps, breathing that matched his own until dawn broke. Caleb never returned to the valley. Months later, his body was found at the base of a cliff, boots missing, as though someone had taken them carefully rather than by accident or animal attack. The town learned to stop asking questions. The Blackwoods came twice a year, always before dark, trading for supplies and leaving silently. Men swore you could feel them watching even as they walked away. Those who followed the wagon's tracks into the woods turned back long before the farmhouse. The air grew wrong, heavy, as if the valley itself pushed you away. The dogs' howls echoed from unseen ridges. Hunters reported eerie discoveries, tracks that began human and ended as paw prints, arranged not in chaos but in patterns, deliberate as writing. No one could explain them. No one dared study them closely. Fathers told their sons not to test the rules. The valley was off limits. If you heard the howls, you stayed inside, no matter how close they sounded. Curiosity, they said, was a death wish. Even the wildlife seemed to obey. Deer gave the Blackwood farm wide berth. Birds fell silent near the property. At dusk, the only sound was that unnerving chorus rising from deep within the valley. Locals began to mark the dates of the Blackwoods' visits like holy days. They said storms always followed, as if the family brought the winter down from the hills when they came to town. Letters from the time speak of strange encounters, glimpses of boys moving through the fog on all fours, shadows flitting between fence posts, lantern lights glimpsed through trees where no path should have been. In 1954, a student from Dartmouth entered the valley with a recorder. His equipment was found days later covered in frost. The only sound on the tape was a single whisper, "Go back." The student never returned home. His family refused to speak of him. Some claimed the Blackwoods buried the tape themselves, but the sheriff said no man in Millbrook had the courage to step that far. By the 1960s, the valley had become more than a place. It was a presence. Men swore it watched them, judged them, and weighed whether they had the right to keep breathing its air. Houses nearest the woods boarded their windows at night. They claimed to hear scratching, low growls just beyond the walls. No one ever saw who or what left the tracks circling their sheds by morning. Teenagers dared each other to step beyond the last streetlight. Most ran back within minutes, shaken, swearing they heard laughter in the trees, deep and rough, nothing like the voices of ordinary boys. The men who stayed longest said the forest seemed to rearrange itself, paths curving away from where they had walked seconds before, as if guiding them somewhere they had no right to see. Every generation brought new disappearances, a hunter gone missing, a trapper's gear found abandoned, a traveler never seen again. Millbrook stopped asking questions. Some debts weren't meant to be collected. Even dogs in town acted strangely. On certain nights, they lay flat, tails tucked, ears pinned back, refusing to make a sound until dawn. Fathers whispered that they were listening to their cousins beyond the hills. The Blackwoods themselves changed, too. The boys moved with uncanny precision, their faces calm, their eyes almost too still. When they smiled, it was like seeing a mask pulled too tightly across bone. Men began to say the Blackwoods weren't dangerous so long as you followed the unspoken rules. But every year, a new rule was added, and every year the family looked a little less like men. The 1970s brought satellite photos of the farm. From above, the property looked more like a stronghold. Patched roofs, sprawling dog pens, paths crisscrossing the fields like veins, leading deeper into the dark heart of the valley. Hunters spoke of hearing drumming at night. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 again. It came from no direction and every direction, echoing in the hollow spaces of the hills like a warning. Some nights the howls turned into something stranger, a chorus that sounded like speech, like chanting, layered voices weaving together until it felt like the whole valley was breathing the same wordless prayer. Fathers began to tell their sons the valley would outlast Millbrook itself. They said it belonged to the Blackwoods now, and that trying to take it back would be like fighting the wind. The boys who once played in the town square no longer came at all. Their world had narrowed to the farmhouse, the woods, and the sound of paws on snow echoing like a hymn through the night. Even in the dead of winter, lanterns glowed in the farmhouse windows, steady and warm. Men wondered who stayed awake in there, watching, listening, waiting for whatever the valley was still preparing. It was said you could feel their eyes on you even when you were miles away. Hunters claimed the hair on their necks stood up whenever they stepped too close to the ridge. By the end of the century, the valley was a place few dared enter. And yet its presence grew larger, its legend heavier, as if it was no longer content to stay hidden. Some swore the valley wanted to be seen, that it had watched long enough and was calling the rest of Millbrook to step closer to see what had been growing there since Eli's first night. Those who listened said the howls were different now, sharper, closer, perfectly harmonized. Not just dogs, not just men. Something else entirely, something that had learned to speak in a language older than words. Millbrook held its breath. The valley had been watching for decades, patient, waiting. And somewhere beyond the last light, the 8th generation was nearly ready to step out of the trees. By the time the 8th generation began to rise, Millbrook had grown quiet, nearly hollow. Empty barns stood like broken teeth on the horizon, but the valley beyond still glowed with life every night. The Blackwood farmhouse no longer looked weathered. It looked prepared. Its patched roof shone silver in moonlight. Dog pens spread across the property like fortifications, and figures moved between them with the precision of soldiers patrolling a border. Photographs taken from the ridge showed boys standing in perfect stillness, their faces eerily symmetrical, their eyes catching the sun like coins. Their movements were too deliberate, too rehearsed, like they were practicing being seen. Hunters claimed they saw pairs of figures, one upright, one running low beside him, pausing together on the ridgeline. They tilted their heads at the exact same angle, then vanished into the trees. Those who ventured closer returned with stories that sounded like fever dreams. They spoke of hearing multiple voices speaking in unison, a sound that turned into growling laughter before melting back into silence. The valley had always been patient, but now it seemed eager. The howls no longer stayed deep in the pines. They came closer, circling Millbrook's edge, as though testing whether the town would answer. Even the oldest men, who once dismissed the legends, kept their lamps burning through the night. They said they could feel it. The bloodline was ready. Whatever Eli had begun had reached its peak. At dawn, strange tracks appeared in the snow. Too long for men, too narrow for wolves, they moved in pairs, side by side, always heading toward the town before turning back at the last fence. Children whispered that they saw figures crouching just beyond the fields. Not boys, not dogs, something in between. And when they blinked, the shapes were gone, leaving only paw prints in perfect circles. Hunters left offerings near the valley edge, slabs of venison, sacks of grain, and in the morning, they were gone. No tracks led away, only deep impressions where something had knelt. Some nights the air throbbed with distant drumming. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 again, like a signal answered from multiple ridges at once. Men said the valley had become a single vast heartbeat. Those who had seen the youngest Blackwoods up close swore they didn't just look strange, they felt strange. Their presence was heavy, electric, like standing too near a storm about to break. When they came to town, the streets grew silent. Dogs lowered their heads. The Blackwood boys never spoke above a murmur, but every man who heard them said the sound made his bones ache. The 8th generation moved with uncanny grace. Their feet barely disturbed the dust. Their shadows seemed too long, stretching across the road like claws reaching forward. Men swore they heard paws striking the ground where no dogs stood. Researchers tried again to document the family. They brought cameras, recorders, notes. Most abandoned the project within days, complaining of sleepless nights and the feeling of being watched. Their equipment returned with scratches no man could explain. One journalist stayed longest. He claimed he saw a gathering under a moonless sky, boys and dogs forming a circle, heads bowed, bodies swaying together. The sound they made was neither prayer nor song. He left before dawn, white-haired despite being barely 40, his notebook full of half-finished sentences. He never returned to Millbrook, but his pages hinted that the family no longer sought to hide what they were becoming. The valley itself seemed to shift. Trails curved toward the Blackwood farm, streams rerouted in the spring thaw, as if the land was reshaping to suit its chosen sons. The place no longer belonged to outsiders. Millbrook's council quietly warned travelers to avoid the valley altogether. Signs were posted, roads rerouted, but still some men went missing. Search parties found only claw marks carved deep into tree bark, higher than a man's head. When storms rolled in, the howls became deafening, overlapping until the sound was like 100 voices calling across the hills. Fathers told their sons to stay indoors, no matter what they thought they saw. Even the moon seemed to play tricks. Men swore it shone brighter over Kine Valley, turning the snow to silver, casting long shadows that looked like hunters running just ahead, always out of reach. One night, a group of loggers reported hearing their own names called from the tree line. The voices were deep, familiar, like their fathers calling them home. They left their tools and never returned. Those still living near the valley said this was the sign. The 8th generation had learned speech, or something like it. Not just sound, but mimicry, something that could wear a man's name like a mask. Farmers found paw prints leading up to their porches, stopping just short of the door. Something had stood there, listening. When they opened the door at dawn, the snow was undisturbed, but the air still felt warm. The dogs of Millbrook began to behave strangely, pacing, whining, staring toward the valley. Some broke free at night and ran toward the hills, never returning, as though answering a call too strong to resist. Photographs from that winter show the youngest Blackwoods with faces too perfect, skin too smooth. Only the eyes betrayed them, amber, glowing faintly even in daylight, as if lit from within by some unseen fire. Their fathers no longer came to town. The boys handled the trade now, their movements measured, their words quiet, their smiles stretching just slightly too wide, revealing teeth that caught the lamplight sharper than before. Stories spread beyond Millbrook. Paranormal magazines printed blurry photographs of clawed hands on fence posts. Amateur radio operators claimed to pick up howling on static-filled nights, a chorus that faded the closer you got to town. Outsiders came with cameras, hoping for proof. Most left within hours. Some said their equipment failed the moment they crossed the ridge. Batteries drained as though the valley itself refused to be recorded. Those who stayed swore they saw two figures watching from the roof of the farmhouse, motionless until the lanterns were doused, then gone as if they had never been there at all. Even men who didn't believe admitted something was coming. The eighth generation had turned from legend to living presence. Every howl was a reminder that Millbrook had been spared only because it had kept its distance. The snow that year was heavy, but no Blackwood tracks showed struggle. Their paths cut straight through drifts chest-deep to other men. When they passed, the air smelled of pine sap and wet iron. Old men claimed the valley was ready for its final step. The eighth generation was no longer just surviving. They were preparing, sharpening themselves, waiting for the right moment to step fully into the open. Millbrook lived in fear, but also fascination. The people could not look away. It was as if the whole town stood on a threshold, knowing the next winter might bring the Blackwoods closer than ever before. And when the first howl of spring came, perfectly harmonized, echoing across the hills, every man who heard it swore it sounded like a summons, a call that would one day be answered. By the late 20th century, the Blackwoods were more legend than family. Stories about them circulated in bars, truck stops, and hunting lodges, each one darker than the last, each one whispered like a prayer. Urban explorers drove in from distant cities, drawn by rumor and daring. They brought cameras, flashlights, and bravado, but their courage rarely lasted the night. Some returned pale and speechless. Others didn't return at all. Television crews tried documentaries in the 1990s. The projects were abandoned after days of failed equipment, endless fog, and locals who refused to speak. One cameraman admitted later he woke to warm breath just outside his tent. The town grew smaller, its windows boarded, its streets empty by nightfall. Those who stayed behind became keepers of the unspoken rules, passing them from father to son like sacred laws that could never be broken. Men who hunted near the valley began carrying 2 rifles instead of 1. Not for protection, they said, but for respect. 1 shot for the deer, 1 for the thing that might be watching. Satellite photos from the late 70s and 80s revealed sprawling dog pens and patched roofs. But what unsettled researchers most were the trails leading away, too straight, too perfect, like paths worn by endless repetition. Paranormal magazines printed grainy photos of claw marks higher than a man's head. Others showed shapes caught mid-stride, blurs that seemed half canine, half man, their limbs too long, their heads tilted unnaturally toward the lens. The internet turned their story into something larger. Forums filled with speculation. Some swore the Blackwoods were proof of evolution gone wrong. Others called them guardians of something older, a living pact no one dared break. Hikers vanished with growing regularity. Search parties found gear arranged in circles, boots placed neatly, footprints that started human before turning to paw prints, as if someone had decided to leave a message instead of a body. Some men said they heard their own voices whispered back at them in the woods, not echoes. Perfect mimicry, repeated just behind them, close enough to raise the hair on their necks. Cell phones failed near the valley. Batteries drained. GPS refused to work. Compasses spun. It was as if the land itself rejected modern intrusion, silencing the tools of men who tried to measure it. In winter, drone footage captured something darting between the trees on all fours. For a single frame, amber eyes reflected in the lens flare before the footage cut abruptly to black, leaving viewers frozen in dread. Those explorers shut down their channel the next day, their accounts deleted. Men who had seen the footage swore they heard howling outside their homes that same night, distant but closing fast, harmonized in perfect unison. Even those who dismissed the stories admitted the valley changed people. Men who spent too long there returned quiet, waking at night to sounds no one else could hear, staring toward the hills until sunrise. Farmers found livestock missing. No blood, no tracks except deliberate paw prints circling the barns, as though someone had inspected them carefully, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. The sheriff stopped filing reports. He said there was no point. The valley took what it wanted. The town survived by silence, by looking away, by pretending the Blackwoods were gone for good. But they weren't gone. They came to town twice a year, taller now, their sons moving with eerie grace. The streets emptied before they arrived, men watching from behind curtains as trade was done quickly, quietly. Their voices were deeper, their movements synchronized, every gesture mirrored as though rehearsed. They smelled of pine, smoke, and iron. Men swore they felt the weight of the valley itself whenever the Blackwoods stood nearby. At night, the howls were closer. No longer just a sound carried on the wind, but a chorus that seemed to vibrate the walls, as though the whole valley was announcing itself to Millbrook. Hunters left offerings again, meat, tools, anything they thought might appease whatever lived out there. By morning, the gifts were gone, never scattered, never wasted, taken with care, as though acknowledged and accepted. Fathers warned their sons more fiercely than ever. Never go past the last light. Never follow the sound, no matter how close it seems. Never look back if you hear something pacing your steps. The 8th generation had no need to hide. They watched openly from the ridges, their silhouettes framed by moonlight. Sometimes they stood upright, sometimes crouched, sometimes side by side with their hounds, still as stone. Strangers who doubted the stories were welcomed to test them. They rarely stayed past midnight. One man left his gear behind entirely, running out of the valley barefoot, screaming that something had learned his name. Those who stayed too long returned broken, their faces pale, their voices shaking. They spoke of shapes circling them, moving closer with each hour until they couldn't tell which shadows were men and which were dogs. The valley seemed alive, aware of every footstep, every trespass. Men swore the wind itself carried words, distant whispers that spoke of hunger, of patience, of a pact waiting to be fulfilled. And still, Millbrook endured. The men who remained stayed because they knew the rules, because they could feel that invisible line between safety and ruin, between living as neighbors and becoming prey. In spring, when the snow melted, strange carvings appeared on trees near the valley edge, claw marks forming shapes almost like symbols, as though someone had been writing messages for those who dared approach. The sheriff refused to investigate. He said there was nothing to arrest, nothing to fight. The valley belonged to the Blackwoods now, and the town's survival depended on leaving them to whatever they had become. Despite the fear, some men were drawn closer. They sat on porches listening to the howls, claiming they could hear words within them, fragments of speech that sounded like prayers or invitations whispered through the dark. By the 2000s, the Blackwoods were an online obsession. Theories multiplied, footage circulated, but those who truly lived near Kine Valley said the truth was worse than any theory. The family no longer feared being seen. The valley thrummed with activity at night. Lights flickered deep within the woods, too far to be lanterns, too steady to be campfires. Men said it looked like stars had fallen and taken root in the forest. More hikers vanished, their trails ending in patterns instead of chaos. Circles, spirals, deliberate arrangements of gear left behind as though someone had been asked to lay down their possessions before disappearing. The howls became bolder. Men heard them in broad daylight, echoing down empty streets, vibrating glass in windows, reminding everyone that distance was no longer a barrier. The Blackwoods were close, and growing closer. Fathers taught their sons new rules. Never leave meat outside overnight. Never speak of the family by name after dark. Never whistle near the valley. The rules were endless, but they kept Millbrook alive. Each year the fear deepened, but so did the fascination. Men whispered that whatever was coming, it would not be an attack but an arrival. Something long promised, something patiently prepared through 8 generations of blood. And with each winter storm, the howls returned stronger, clearer, less like beasts and more like men singing. The sound rolled over Millbrook like thunder, letting everyone know the waiting was nearly over. Millbrook today is little more than a scattering of mailboxes, rusting tractors, and barns that lean like old men. Yet the valley still watches, and its sons still walk its frozen ground under a moonless sky. The few men who remain have learned to be quiet. They don't report missing livestock, don't question claw marks scratched into their sheds. They keep their lamps lit at night and their shutters nailed tight. When asked about the Blackwoods, they shrug, saying the family moved away years ago. But their voices falter, and their eyes drift toward the tree line, betraying what every man in Millbrook still knows. The valley hasn't gone silent. The howls are closer now. Not distant echoes, but near, circling the town like wolves testing a fence, letting every man know the 8th generation no longer waits. Travelers sometimes get stranded on the road near the valley. Those who are found alive speak of being guided through the storm by a tall figure with a dog's head, always ahead, never quite seen. Search parties never find the tracks the men describe. The snow is smooth, undisturbed, except for faint patterns near the road. Paw prints and boot prints side by side, ending where the wind should have covered them. Men have captured strange recordings, low growls folding into harmonized howls, followed by what sounds like laughter, deep and rough. The recordings are shared in whispers, then deleted, as if playing them too often might summon something. The dogs in town still know. On certain nights they lie low, ears flat, tails tucked, until the last howl fades. Some refuse to enter barns, staring instead toward the valley as if expecting visitors. Fathers still tell their sons the rules, but the rules have grown harder to follow. The howls call closer each year, tempting even the cautious to step beyond the last streetlight and listen. Some men do. Their footprints are found leading into the pines, never back. Sometimes their coats are discovered days later, neatly folded, as if they shed them willingly before disappearing into the valley forever. Millbrook has learned that survival means obedience. The town no longer resists, no longer sends men searching. They accept each disappearance as tribute, the price for keeping the valley from crossing fully into their world. Even the storms feel different now. When the wind dies, the howls rise, perfectly timed, a rhythm that sounds like breathing, as though the entire valley has a single vast chest exhaling into the night. Some men claim they can hear words within the howls now, names repeated softly, questions asked. They say the valley is speaking, and that one day soon Millbrook will have to answer. The few strangers who pass through rarely stay. The emptiness of the streets unsettles them, the boarded windows, the silence at dusk. They leave quickly, taking the old road rather than risk hearing the night calls. Yet some are drawn closer, unable to resist. They drive past the last light, park near the ridge, waiting. Their headlights catch shapes on the road, crouched figures that vanish before the engine can start again. Every season, the Blackwoods step closer. Hunters see them on ridges where they were never seen before. Their silhouettes are clear now, men and hounds side by side, heads tilting as though in invitation. It is said that the valley's edge is shrinking, creeping closer to town each year. The snow carries strange prints even within sight of Millbrook's church, as though the Blackwoods are marking new territory, foot by foot. At night, the howls sometimes come in 8s, 8 voices rising together, perfect harmony. The oldest men in town refuse to speak when it happens, sitting motionless, listening, waiting for it to stop. They say this is the sign the pact is nearly fulfilled. 8 generations have passed. The family has become something beyond human, beyond beast, and now they are ready to leave the shadows entirely. Fathers say Millbrook has one choice left: to keep obeying the rules or to welcome the Blackwoods back, let them step into the streets and claim whatever they have been promised for a century. Each winter, the tension grows. Men walk faster at night. Lanterns burn brighter. But the howls don't fade. They grow sharper, closer, filling the air until it feels like the valley itself is breathing down your neck. One night, a farmer swore he heard footsteps in the snow behind him. He refused to turn around, repeating the rule under his breath. When he reached his door, the steps stopped, perfectly matched to his. In the morning, he found paw prints beside his own, leading all the way from the fence line. Not scattered, not chaotic, deliberate, side by side, as if walking in step with him all night. Other men report similar signs: doors left ajar that were locked, fresh claw marks on wood too high for any ordinary animal to reach. The message is clear. The valley no longer hides. The sheriff says little now. His office is quiet, his reports sparse. He keeps a lantern burning on his desk through the night, as though expecting a visitor who might come knocking before dawn. The town has stopped ringing its church bell after dark. The last time it rang, a chorus of howls answered, so close men swore they felt the sound vibrate in their bones. The bell has stayed silent since. When storms come, the snow carries strange symbols: paw prints forming circles, spirals, lines too deliberate to be random. Men say they are maps, directions, or perhaps warnings for those who still dare to resist. Millbrook no longer speaks of fighting back. The men have accepted that the valley will have its way. They only pray it will take its time, that it will not come for all at once. Some whisper that the Blackwoods are no longer just a family, but a lineage chosen to carry something older than themselves, guardians or predators. It no longer matters. Their bloodline has been honed for this moment. The younger men who hear the howls say they feel something stir in their own chests, a pull they can't explain. Some disappear into the valley, leaving fathers to bar their doors and wait. The valley does not rush. It waits as it always has, patient, confident. Each winter it steps closer, each howl sharper, until one day there may be no line left to cross. On windless nights, men claim they hear breathing outside their homes, slow and deep, perfectly matched to their own, as if something is listening, imitating, waiting for permission to enter. Those who have heard it never sleep soundly again. They know the valley remembers them, knows their scent, knows their steps, and one night will come calling when they are least ready to answer. In the end, the greatest terror is not attack, but inevitability. The 8th generation no longer lurks. They wait. And every howl is a promise that one day Millbrook will have to look back. And when that day comes, the town will remember the first rule ever spoken: never follow the howls. But by then, the howls will be inside the streets, and the choice will be gone.